Northern New York, a place of unparalleled natural beauty, astonishing history, and the strange and supernatural. Tonight, we'll explore 4 of the North Country's most storied places, from mansions to subterranean tunnels. And we'll hear just how the peculiar history of Northern New York never seems to leave this curious little place where time stands still. This is Northern New York's Most Haunted, with me, your host, Nick Dephtereos. Have you ever been out to eat in downtown Watertown? For over 200 years, Public Square has been a hub of activity in the North Country, and according to the owner of Empire Square, that holds true for the living and the dead.
The building that houses Empire Square was built in 1855, and since 1812, there's been a structure on this very spot. The owner says echoes of those bygone days began to make themselves heard shortly after she bought the building and hired someone to clean out its centuries-old sub-basement, 2 stories underground.
It's the craziest thing when people would put trash in their building, but they do. So I hired someone to come and carry it all out, put it in a dumpster, and after the second day, he came up to me and he said, "Did you know your building's haunted?" And I said, "Well, Gerald, it's an old building. I'm sure it's haunted. It's probably fine." And he said, "Oh," he sits in the corner and he just watches and he doesn't say anything, and I call him Charlie. And I was like, okay, we have a name, Charlie.
And although there remains some mystery over who Charlie is and just how long he's sat quietly in the basement, nowadays he has no trouble at all making his presence known.
We have a bathroom downstairs, and that bathroom will lock itself. And I have staff that when they go in there, they won't lock the door. They use that bathroom and they leave it a little bit open because I've had people get locked in there. I've had it get locked and nobody's in there. We don't have keys to it. I have some staff that won't go down there, they don't like to go down there. And then some of the weirdest things that happened to my own kids who just thought it was normal that there was a friend in the basement. So I asked my nanny, she said, "Your son used to draw pictures." She's like, "Yeah, he didn't draw them for you. He drew them for the man in the restaurant." I gave Scotty's pictures to the cook. He informed me that I was giving those pictures to the wrong person. She said he stood in the basement, all 3 years old of himself, pointed down and said, "Give them to the man down there."
But Charlie isn't all mischief. In recent years, he's displayed a fondness for giving gifts, especially to those who give him something first.
When I first came up here to start working in this building, I didn't really believe in ghosts. And one day I was bringing a couple boxes downstairs and I said, "All right, Charlie, I got some gifts for you." And on the bench was a tiny little bottle of champagne. Unopened, just sitting there, and it had not been there before. And I had spent a lot of time in the sub-basement, and it was that one time that I said, "All right, Charlie, I got some gifts for you." And he gave me a gift back. I picked up the bottle and turned it around and it said, "I spent the millennium at Kegler's Lounge." And it was also the year that I was born. So Charlie knew something about me before I even knew that he was there.
Strangely, Charlie has a habit of leaving his gifts in the same exact spot in the building's sub-basement, and some of them have proved almost too uncanny.
This was, as a mother, gave me the biggest creeps because these are the pencils that my kids had upstairs, but my kids never came downstairs. Sarah said, "I found these just in the path." I said, "You need to draw Charlie a picture." I had one gal down here that was like, "He's pulling on my purse. There is something in my purse I think he wants." And then she opened up her purse and she had like a little piece of like fool's gold. And it was shortly thereafter that we got this little card on the bench. She gave the fool's gold and he dropped off the card. I just had customers go through on Sunday. They'd heard about the ghost stories, so they told Charlie, they said, "Charlie, we want to take your picture. We're gonna turn the lights off. Thank you. We're gonna take your picture now." Turned off the lights. They took photos. There's a shadow in the chair where Charlie sits. They were shocked. I don't know of any staff who doesn't actually believe at this point. And they'll call me and they'll be like, how do we turn these lights on? I say, "Tell Charlie you need the lights on."
And so perhaps the next time you're in one of Watertown's cozy, historic restaurants, you'll raise a glass to the 2 centuries of patrons who have gone before you. And perhaps some of them will raise a glass with you. Some say knowledge is power. But here at the Flower Memorial Library, it would seem that the spirits that linger on here have a bit too much knowledge, and perhaps a bit too much power.
The Flower Library was opened to the public in 1905, almost 120 years ago. Built by Emma Flower Taylor, the daughter of Governor Roswell Flower, it was constructed on a grand scale in the Greco-Roman style and has remained one of the North Country's most awe-inspiring places since the day it was built. But within its marble walls lies many stranger, darker curiosities.
Emma Flower Taylor, who built the library, she was a doll collector, and she collected them her whole life long on all of her worldly travels. Anytime her father, Governor Flower, traveled, he would get her a doll. And later on, after she had passed away, her entire antique doll collection was donated to the library. In the years that I've worked here at Flower Library, we've come to realize that we think there might be a spirit attached to one or some of the dolls.
And the reason why is nothing short of macabre. Several of the library's dolls are in fact made with human hair. The Victorian era's strange fascination with all things morbid led to some practices we might find a little grim today. When a child died in the 1800s, it wasn't uncommon to save their hair and create a doll in their likeness. And some of these chilling mementos are in fact part of the library's collection.
You know, we've had a few ghost investigations. They believe that perhaps maybe the spirit of a child is attached to one of the dolls. We hear a lot of different noises in the basement, especially before the building opens. Different contractors have said they hear little tiny feet running up and down the aisles. And this is a concrete floor, so it would be easy to hear if there were footsteps in the aisles. So little tiny feet running up and down the aisles. Also dark shadows out of the corner of your eye, or a light children's giggle and there's no one around, or the building's not even open, so there shouldn't be children in the building. We have had contractors in the building working in the ceiling, working on various things, and they will hear those footsteps, they'll hear that giggle, they'll see the shadows out of the corner of their eye. We'll come in about the time the building's open and we'll see them sitting outside. We'll be like, what's going on? And they're frightened and they don't want to go back in the building.
But the strange goings-on of the library's dolls aren't just confined to hearsay. The library director's desk used to be downstairs, not far from where the dolls are displayed. But today, she works on the main floor, and as it turns out, there may be a more sinister reason why she's relocated.
I mean, I worked down in the basement for a while. My desk was down here, and I heard a doll fall over one day. And I mean, it's very hard to knock these over. This is a very sturdy case. You could jump on the floor, you could rattle the case, and things shouldn't be falling over. And one of them slumped down and you could hear it drag. And it terrified me. And I had texted my coworker and I said, you have to come down here. I'm frozen with fear, I can't come upstairs. They give me a bad vibe to even touch them. I usually don't touch them if I don't have to.
Dark shadows, the footfall of little feet in the empty halls, the laughter of children in an empty building over 100 years old, and dolls that move on their own. Perhaps it's all just the rumblings of an old building. Or perhaps, as usual, librarians know all too well what's going on inside the library.
We're not exactly sure, where the spirits come from. Are they attached to artifacts? Are they attached to the home that was torn down before the library was built? There was a house here, the Emerson House. which was purchased and demolished so that the library could be built? Is it something left over from that? It's very hard to predict where the spirits come from.
And so remember, the next time you're wandering the halls of this, one of the North Country's most historic treasures, the history here is more than meets the eye. It was said that by the early 20th century, there were more millionaires per capita in Watertown, New York than any other city in the nation. Just who were these glittering families of Watertown's Gilded Age? Well, we're here at the mansion of one of them. This is the Paddock Mansion, home to Edwin and Olive Paddock. From one of Watertown's oldest families, they made a fortune in banking and real estate in the 19th century, and according to some, they're still here.
Once upon a time, Washington Street in Watertown was lined with the great houses of the city's high society families, and the Paddock's house was no exception. Built in 1878, it was a compromise between Edwin's fashionable Italianate tastes and Olive's love for the charm of Swiss chalets acquired during their travels abroad. Today, the house is a museum, the home of the Jefferson County Historical Society, with over 100,000 artifacts inside. The Paddock's furniture, porcelain, portraits, curios, and decor can be found throughout the house as though they never left. In fact, it seems as though Mrs. Paddock never meant to leave at all. As sightings of her are so well documented, they've drawn paranormal investigators from across the state, and the museum's director believes the house may still be occupied by its original owners.
People say that when they're walking in front of the house, they'll look up and they see somebody peering out of the second floor window. Many times it's a lady in a green dress. The window that they refer to was Olive's bedroom. They also report seeing her on the 13th stair of the staircase that's behind me. If Olive is still here, I believe that she's just checking on her beloved house to make sure that we're doing right by it.
And if the lady of the house is still in residence, it seems so too is her loyal staff. A great house like the Paddocks, after all, is nothing without its cohort of servants. Today, with the family china still in its exact same place in the cupboard, who but Mrs. Paddock's maids know best where to find it? Though over a century has passed, it's said they still man their posts, opening the cabinets, reaching for the best plates, crystal and tea sets, still ready to entertain their mistress's guests in the grand style.
We were having a meeting of the collections committee, which we do quite often, and we were in the main gallery, and in the butler's pantry, we heard what sounded like the china cabinet rattling. And I thought, well, maybe it's a big truck going by and rattling the windows, but when we continued to hear the rattling, we realized that maybe it wasn't a truck going by. The items in these cabinets all belong to the Paddocks. And what we heard was several different times in a small period of time. It continued to do it throughout probably the next hour.
There were many people who were here at this meeting.
There's probably half a dozen.
Yeah, and so it makes sense that a maid would feel like
maybe
there's company.
Maybe she had to get some tea or something.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible.
But to get to the heart of when strange things began here, we have to go back even further, before the Paddocks ever built their great mansion, when an even older house stood on this same spot. 200 years ago, Jabez Foster lived here with his wife, Hannah. Foster was an enterprising man, owning a store, a grist mill, real estate, eventually becoming a judge. But it was Hannah Foster's troubled life here that may have changed this place forever.
Mrs. Foster was out in the backyard with one of her young children, and all of a sudden the child disappeared, and she realized the child had gone down the well. So Mrs. Foster, without even thinking about it, she jumped in the well after the child. She got the child up on her shoulders and got her lifted up high enough to where somebody outside who heard all the noise could come and pluck the child out. And then they got Mrs. Foster out. And the story goes that after that, she wasn't ever quite right again.
Not long after, Hannah Foster died in 1826. Her husband sold the house to the Paddocks, left town, and died himself in Michigan. But that was only the beginning of the strange happenings here on Washington Street.
This house and all of its Victorian glory was saved from the wrecking ball of the 20th century by Olive Paddock herself. When historic mansions were being torn down left and right in the name of progress, Mrs. Paddock bequeathed her house to Watertown before she died. Today, it's the home of the Jefferson County Historical Society, and some members of the Society's staff are comforted to know that Mrs. Paddock is still here, checking in, making sure that things are just the way she left them.
I absolutely believe their energy is still here. They love this home. This was their place. They made it their own. And so I absolutely believe that they come in and check on us every once in a while.
Today, the Paddock Mansion is open to visitors, and you can walk through this architectural masterpiece just as the Paddocks did over a century ago. Its grace and charm are alive and well, and so too is the love Edwin and Olive Paddock had for their beautiful home. But don't be surprised if Mrs. Paddock lets you know that herself. And now, for the first time on ABC 50, we venture into the heart of one of the most legendary and magnificent buildings in our own North Country, the home of a secret society that has not opened its doors to the uninitiated in almost 100 years. Tonight, Watertown's own Masonic Temple, in all its hidden and astonishing glory, returns to life.
The men of Freemasonry once knew this as the crown jewel of lodges in northern New York, and though it has slept for many long years untouched, we see it now, as the brothers of this lodge once did, a treasure house of architectural wonder and awe. A little illumination, gentlemen.
The Masonic Temple of Watertown, New York, Lodge 49. Built in 1914, its doors have scarcely been opened to outsiders in its 109-year history. Unless, of course, you are a member of the secret fraternal order of Freemasons. George Washington, Ben Franklin, the Marquis de Lafayette all counted among its members. And here, in the great hall of the Masonic Temple, its most secret rites of initiation were performed. And even now, it seems a century's worth of secrets lay shrouded behind these majestic walls.
Today, a great restoration is underway, and stonemasons are once again at work under the careful guidance of the building's owners, Fourth Coast Incorporated, a renewable energy company in Clayton. The main floor is home to Intrepid Broadcasting, Tunes 92.5, as well as other businesses. But on the floors below and above, the ritual tools of the Freemasons, in accordance with their ancient and sacred traditions, have never left their beloved lodge. Born out of the Enlightenment, the free and accepted Masons reached back through the aeons of time and built a brotherhood of men that sought to uphold the moral, intellectual, and spiritual lessons of goodness and truth, veiled in symbol and allegory. Secret they may be, but so too were their predecessors, the ancient medieval guilds that guarded against tyranny and corruption. Their fervent adherence to their ways and privacy still hang heavy over the Masonic Temple, and if ever there was a place with guardian spirits, much like their tools and trappings, they've never left the building.
To say that it comes with a feeling, and sometimes a tangible one, of history is to definitely understate it. Most of the phenomenons that we have experienced ourselves seem to come from people hearing things and not really knowing what the origin may be. So we've got a DJ that was with us for many years that swore up and down for many years that he had heard his name called out in the hallways by a female voice when he was coming in one day early by himself. In the main thoroughfare of the first floor, you just get that feeling like when you're in a house and someone walks by an open door, you just get that change in air and you can kind of feel like someone must have just walked by, but when you go out into the hallway, there's no one there. The biggest one I get is when I come in through an elaborate ramp system that kind of goes from the top to the bottom. And when I come in sometimes, it really sounds, and it could just be the echo effect, and it could just be how you're hearing that ambient noise kind of kicking around, but it sounds so much like it's a noisy silence, if I can explain it that way.
Here I must interrupt. Before we continue with Mr. Sweeney's recollection of the strange auditory phenomena that occur inside the Masonic Temple, for the first time in our series, something truly unexpected occurred. Just as Mr. Sweeney was describing the strange decibel variations and noises that have no sensible interpretation, our own audio system malfunctioned in a way we have neither heard before nor ever understood. The strange sound came through the first microphone, then the second, then all at once, as if whoever or whatever caused it wanted us to know they knew exactly what they were doing. I will allow the interview to play exactly as it happened. There is no explanation for what you are about to hear.
That there's a decibel level that just seems to be higher to the first floor that you realize what it sound like, because it's then really silent. And it sort of makes you just kind of play it back in your mind and go, where was all of that noise coming from that just seems to have disappeared all of a sudden when I walked in?
So even when I asked him, tell me about the strange stuff that happens here, you got some of that.
Yeah, we had everything up until he started talking about the ramps.
Mr. Sweeney was kind enough to carry on, yet there remained the strange feeling that perhaps the brothers of Lodge Number 49 preferred certain things be left unsaid, even after all this time.
There's always this feeling that there's a decibel level that's higher than it should be. And it kind of feels almost like you're hearing sort of low chatter from like a dinner party that would be going on with hundreds of people in a room, but maybe they're just far enough away that it's just that low rumble. And it isn't until you actually open the door to the first floor and come in that you sort of recognize all at once, like it hits you like a brick wall, that this is actually silence. It's the feeling that you just noticed that this is how silent it should be, so what was that back there? And that can make the hair on your arm stand up for sure.
Time has stood still here at the Masonic Temple, and here in the inner sanctum, it looks much as it did a century ago. This is, after all, the home of a very secret society. And perhaps the ancient members whose names are still inscribed on these seats have enjoyed the fact that things have remained unbothered and secret all these years. Tonight, we have barely scratched the surface of the strange and otherworldly goings-on of this historic place. For those of us lucky enough to call the North Country home, we would do well to remember the lives and legacies of those who've lived here before us. For it seems that here, more than any place else, they tend to linger on, drawn perhaps to the beauty, nature, and spirit of this incredible corner of the world. I'm Nick Dephtereos. This has been Northern New York's Most Haunted. On behalf of ABC 50, myself, and all the ghosts of the North Country's past, thank you.